Hello, good afternoon, good morning if you're on the West Coast. Good evening if you're watching from overseas, which I hope many of you are. My name is Dagmar Painter, and I'm happily here with the artist Helen Zughaib, and we're going to be spending the next hour talking about her greatest hits. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
So let me give you a little idea of our point of discussion today. I'm going to be having a little bit of a dialogue with Helen. We'll be showing you some of her work, and we also have a chat function. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat function. And at the end of our dialogue, I'd be happy to look at them and see how many we can answer as we ask the questions to Helen. So let me get started. So the subtitle of our show today is Looking Back, Looking Forward. And what we're going to be doing is talking to Helen about a very, very interesting life that she's led, all of which has led to the kind of art that she's producing today. And you'll see a great degree of continuity from early pieces to the work that she is now engaged in, which we'll talk about very briefly at the end. But I've got a portrait, a self-portrait here, and Helen was telling me that she doesn't do very many self-portraits, but the important elements of her life and her journey are often reflected in the self-portraits. So I thought we'd maybe start with this one. Helen, could you tell me a little bit about the elements that are in your portrait of yourself with the cat and the map, and of course the paintbrush?
Sure, but let me first say thank you, Dagmar Painter, for being an incredible curator over all these years that you've been with me and my work, and you've certainly watched it grow and move and change, and as you've watched along with me, the events that have shaped a lot of my work and the way I think. And thank you to the Jerusalem Fund, and thank you to all you wonderful people who are watching. And if we repeat any stories, forgive us. I don't know who's listening, but thank you for that, to be present today. Yes, this portrait is called Map of Home, and it's one I did when I finally returned home. I call home Beirut, Lebanon, after 35 years of last being there. We were evacuated during the Civil War. And so in this painting, the first piece I did when I was thinking about going back in 2010, you see that I have the map of Lebanon over my head and my heart, the sea and the mountains. And you see, as Dagmar said, my paintbrush with me at all times, the hand of Fatima that was given to me by my aunt in Jordan, and my trusted cat. And I mark where I was born. In my hair, there's a little star, and I was born in Beirut. And so this piece is called Map of Home. And really it is, exemplifies how much Lebanon is in my heart and in my mind.
We're going to start in a sort of what I like to call an artistic chronology rather than a time-based chronology, although a lot of this will be from older times to present day. But I wanted to start with something that may be familiar to a lot of our audience, a series that you did called Stories My Father Told Me. And I have 3 of them on view here, which I'll show the audience while you're talking about it. And I have 2 questions about these stories. For those who don't know, I'd love you to talk a little bit about the genesis of the project and how you decided to do these stories, which, by the way, are also published in a book that is available from Helen as well. So address that a little bit, but I also like to talk about art. And so I'd like you to address the concepts of how you came upon your style, because I find that this series is one of the ones that really exposes the style that you chose to paint in. And I know you studied art at for your college work at Syracuse University, got your degree. And it would be interesting to see how what you studied in school and all of that eventually helped you to define the style that you've basically, more or less adapted and stayed with for your entire career. Mm-hmm. So start first with talking a little bit about the genesis of stories my father told me.
Sure. My father, for those of you who know Arabic, the word hakawati means storyteller. And a storyteller is a very revered, usually an elder, that imparts stories to either his family or relatives or the village that carry on a tradition of education and of imbuing in the listener a way of behaving in society, what the traditions are, what the values of that community, the family, and the larger community are. So my father was our Hakawati, and he told us stories about his young childhood in Damascus, Syria, where he was born, and later on his adulthood in Lebanon, Marjayun, and up in Zahli and Shwer, and then finally when he immigrates to America. But for him, it was important for our family and for the younger generation, my nephew and my nieces, to hear these stories that are true and parables that he felt are important so they can go on and keep the traditions of our family alive, even in these younger generations. So there are about 24, and I painted each story that my father wrote for me. And the last one is, this is saying goodbye when they're leaving Lebanon, and the ship called the Vulcania will come. Here it is. It did not look like that with a dragon head for anybody. But it was the first time any of the people on the ship had sailed into New York. And the young people, my father was about 18 or 19 years old at that time, and they had heard that they were going to be passing by the Statue of Liberty almost at dawn. And so all of the young people on the ship decided to stay up and wait through the night so that they would be on the crest of the ship and see Lady Liberty as she comes into view. And when my father told us that story, and me, it was very moving. You could see still the emotion and hear it in his voice. And he remembers that it was a beautiful day, a beautiful dawn, and a clear sky. So regarding the style, Dagmar, that you referred to, that people seem to recognize, the paint that I learned to use and love over the years at Syracuse is gouache. And that, for those of you who don't know, is an opaque watercolor. I do mix my own colors. They're not right out of the tube. I have very fine brushes, very, very tiny brushes. Dagmar has seen them and been to the studio. And it's fairly painstaking. You need to move fast and accurately with this kind of paint because it's very unforgiving. And for that reason, a lot of artists don't like to use it. But for me, I love the control I get with it. I love the flatness and this purity and clarity of color that I feel are not as attainable for me with oil, certainly, or acrylic. So I go back and back and back, though I've done other things, but I always love using the gouache. I love the feeling of it. And I do, after these years, know how to control it for the most part.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me make two little comments about this. As we were shaping the show and deciding what pieces to put in, it is also very significant that this is an immigrant story. And the issue of immigration, of course, is now front and center,
Right.
Often is, but especially so at the moment here in the United States. And I always, when I see this piece, I always like to pretend that that's you. You're in their hearts, even though they don't know it yet.
Yeah, that's right. I haven't been born yet, but yes. That is actually my Aunt Mary. That's my Aunt Mary and my father. I mean, he's looking a little young there, but he was really about 18 or 19. And that's Teta beside him, my grandmother, Teta.
So that brings us to a series that you did about America, but also very specific to Washington, D.C. And I want to note that this Washington Monument and the following one that you'll see, which is the U.S. Capitol, are actually in the permanent collection of the Library of Congress, which I think is a great honor and well-deserved. I'm going to show both of them, and Helen, maybe you can talk about your choices in painting these.
Okay, I will have to make a slight correction. These two are not in the Library of Congress, though others are. Yes.
Oh, there was a series. Okay.
Right. The monument, the one prior to this one, the George Washington Monument, was actually gifted by Hillary Clinton to the King of Morocco.
That's the
so
one.
it does have some clout behind it. But yeah, I love that question, Dagmar. When I first came to Washington, and you know, looking and living with these incredibly amazing buildings, but really noticing how white they were. And I kept thinking how, as somebody who's come from the outside and come from somewhere else, and kept thinking about my family and you know, my relatives and people that I know and other people coming to this country. Why is it so important to come to this country? Why is it this country that everybody still tries to come to and loses their life? As Dagmar referred to, the immigrants, you know, crossing borders and so on, and seas and coming to this country. And I thought to myself, you know, I feel almost as if the people who had the privilege of growing up here and calling America their home, and not being insular, but just not reflecting on the rest of the world that dies to try and come here. I thought, well, I don't want them to take these great ideas of what this country was founded on and what it represents to people all over the world. I want people who live here to not take it for granted. So the best way that I could think of was repainting it and making it, first of all, very personal, but getting new attention to these buildings that mean so much and have so much incredible significance, and the idea of what is America, and these ideals that are not represented in any particular administration, but they are represented in a much more lofty and higher level. So painting these monuments with motifs that reflect my background, Asian background, every other kind of person who comes here, in these general palette of red, white, and blues, if you will, echoing the flag. This became a series that I held very dear. And of course, this Capitol, as you selected it for today's talk, Dagmar, of course, means so much today, even as it did then. But we certainly know that the Capitol has endured a lot over this past year. And so she's standing tall here.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have something that I was happy to have, because it's not only part of this idea of relooking at monuments and things that are very dear to us in Washington, D.C., but also, and we'll come upon a number of other pieces as we go on with this talk, I wanted to kind of showcase a little bit that Helen's charm and sense of humor as well. You know, we're going to see a lot of very serious artwork for serious subjects, but underneath it all, there's always Helen's sense of optimism and a very, sometimes very sly sense of humor. So this, for you, those of you who don't live in Washington, D.C., is actually our National Mall. And we can talk about all of the figures that are in this. This is a several seasons worth of
Yeah.
activity on the National Mall. And for those of you who know, there's a wonderful carousel that is just charming, and I love the zebra that you drew. It's just lovely. There's a sculpture garden that has quite a number of giant sculptures not far on one side of the mall. This is a optical illusion house, a three-dimensional house by Lichtenstein that changes shape. And this, for the older viewers among us, is a typewriter eraser, the giant one made by Klaus Oldenburg. And of course, young people have no idea what a typewriter eraser is, but
Right.
nonetheless. And we have ice skaters.
Yep.
Of various skill levels. And we've got runners, and we have bicyclists, and we have people sitting at tables and enjoying the day. Of course, we have Helen and her cat, which we will see much more of in this show. And the Washington Monument on one end of the mall, and of course, the Capitol. And I'm asking Helen because I'm not sure, but is this representative of the botanical greenhouse that's on the end of the mall?
No, I wish it was. No, that's your brilliant insight. Oh, can you hear me?
There. Yes.
Okay, it's there. Yeah,
It's there.
it's there. No, I mean that eraser. I love that eraser. Honestly, every time I passed by there, I felt it was waving to me. So I would always wave at it from the car. Those things were waving at me, and it's me sitting outside of the Lichtenstein house there with the sheriff. And of
That's
course,
her husband, by the way, for those
yes,
who don't know.
and you nailed me with the kitty cat. And the guy sitting next to me was actually a guy that I talked to who had a dog. He was a homeless guy, but he had his dog there. And yes, it is several seasons worth, and I didn't even know that I was doing that. I just thought I want to get the ice skaters in there as well as, the summertime activity. But yeah.
Yeah, it's quintessential mall. We love it. We love it. All right, so now we're going into some of the serious and really seminal moments that have shaped the work that you did. This one is called Prayer Rug for America, and you painted this because of 9/11. And I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, and I want our viewers to notice it is a prayer rug, and you can see, if you look very carefully, the small pair of shoes that are in the corner here, because observant prayers are done with the shoes off. So Helen, go ahead and tell us a little bit about the genesis of this piece.
Yeah, as you said, this marks a beginning, and as you used the word shape a lot of my thoughts and what I'd like to express going forward. But 9/11 definitely shaped the world in a lot of regards too, and so it's kind of before 9/11 and after 9/11. And for me as an artist and somebody who, I'm going to label myself as an Arab American, inherent in my work and in my, I don't know, my approach is to bridge that gap between East and West. And this painting, I think for me, really sums that up. 9/11, we faced a lot of stereotyping, a lot of negativity in the press. I myself was spit on that first week, and it was a time when we felt quite put in a position that we had never really been in that kind of a position. And as an Arab American, you felt almost doubly pained by what had happened. And so my reaction to that was to be spiritual and prayerful and create this rug. You see again this palette of blues and reds and whites where I echo the United States flag. You see a version of that. I am taking liberties artists don't have to be accurate. I am taking liberties with the flag. I am creating a prayer rug, and the little shoes you have taken off before you enter into the mosque, and you enter into this space, a space for introspection, a space for reflectivity, a space for questioning, a space of trying to learn and understand. I created this painting not as a painting for divisiveness. I wanted this painting to bring East and the West together in one spiritual place to reflect and try and heal, Mhm.
Here we have another image of prayerful reflection that again follows your themes of trying to create this bridge among the people of various religions, and the idea of peace being a universal goal, in a sense, of everyone. And so you have produced here, using, again, your very signature style with the patterning, but you also have these different archways that reflect the different religions.
Well, I like that interpretation. They're versions of prayer rugs, whereas you would be praying and you each have your own separate niche, if you will. What I did here, I don't often talk about it, but you see that I have men and women praying together,
Yes.
which may or may not be acceptable. But the idea here is this piece is part of a series I did when this country entered into Iraq, and it was a very upsetting time. So once again, I turned inward. I had done a lot of protesting and marching on the streets, and we still entered into war. So this was one of my ways of handling this incredible sadness that nothing was solved by that particular war. So prayers for peace here is my answer, a small little answer, and reckoning with what was going on.
And of course, it's like a lot of your work, it ends up having universalist meanings, and it stays the test of time because we're often in situations where there's another war or another conflict, either with our own agency or abroad, where we are either supporting or just, not helping. So, these people are going to be praying for a long time.
Yeah, sadly, because we don't seem to learn. Yeah.
That takes us to another seminal moment in the type of work that you were producing. And we did a show together during the time of what we call the first Arab Spring. And that was about 2012, I think, is when we did that show. And you created a very large exhibition that was very optimistic, very hopeful at the time. As we were following the news in the Arab world, we saw more and more countries who were deposing their rulers and looking at various aspects of democracy. And it was all very, very, very blossoming of the idea of freedom for people. And so your style became a lot about the blossoms.
Yeah, I love that. I love, using blossom as a verb as well. I didn't really think about that, but I really like that. Yeah, I mean, for me also, Dagmar knows this, but I had just had my first trip home where Map of Home was, that self-portrait, to Beirut. And when I came back, I was in Syria and Jordan and Lebanon. When I came back, a few months later, the quote unquote Arab Spring began. And as Dagmar mentioned, there was this initial hope, this initial optimism. We saw regimes drop like flies, and the will of the people persist and persevere, and men and women protesting together on the street and shouting for equality and so on and so forth. And this painting, which is in the Library of Congress, as well as the Prayer Rug for America, was the first piece I did in recognizing the Arab Spring and the beginning, the early revolutions and protests that seemed so hopeful. And so I deliberately chose the flower as a recurring motif, not ever thinking that we would still be talking about this quote unquote Arab Spring and the complete devolution and dissolution and disillusionment of it over these past 10, now we're into 11 years now, right, of the war. We'll end with that. But so this piece was, yes, it was in your exhibition, and expressed quite a bit of optimism and hope in terms of the flower and the colors and so on and so forth.
So I amusingly titled this show Her Greatest Hits. And I definitely wanted to include this. This was in the Arab Spring, the first Arab Spring exhibition. And Helen and I were talking about it. And one of the things that, of course, I really like about this piece is that it has a great amount of deeper meaning because of its portrayal of the hopefulness and the springing forth of the blossoms and the freedom. But it also stands on its own as a composition. You get more out of it if you know its background, but you can also simply enjoy it as a, what we like to now have decided is quite an abstract piece of art. And obviously we never think of Zughaib as a abstract painter, but in many ways, abstraction can refer to the concept of the thoughts, as well as the methodology of painting and the style of painting. And so this one does have a lot of abstract thought involved in the production of this picture. And as I say, this was one of the most popular pieces that she did for all of those reasons. But to discuss it just very, very shortly, Helen has a philosophy about the way that she does her work. And I like to express it in my own way, that it kind of parallels my philosophy of how I like to show art. And I always believe that you have to look before you can see, meaning that you need to engage with a piece of art before you can understand the deeper meaning that the artist may have. And Helen, her philosophy is very much of a piece, and it's all about beauty. Helen, do you want to address that?
Yeah, we've had many conversations about that, and people always question, how can I depict subjects that are very difficult to absorb on any level of man's inhumanity to man, and how I can portray them in a quote unquote beautiful way, or beautiful colors or beautiful patterns. And it's to use a word, subversive. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to fool you, but I am, as Dagmar said, I am trying to entice you. I am definitely trying to bring you into my world. So you see this aesthetically attractive painting on the wall. And then, as Dagmar said, you can then go deeper, and you can look at my title. You can look at what I'm trying to say. You can look at the larger issues I'm trying to talk about. But I have succeeded. I may not change your mind. I may not create empathy directly from you seeing my painting, but I have gotten you to look, and I have gotten you to hear a little bit of my message. And for that, I think I can be successful on that level. Definitely. And so I haven't pushed you away. And there is this idea of something that is so untenable or so repulsive, either in a photograph or a painting, that if you're turning away, you're not getting your point across. You're not preaching, but you're certainly not reaching the level of empathy and compassion that you would like and hope to have from your viewer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting the audience to engage with the art is an art form all on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
This is another example of how that works. And this is a series called Spring Flight. And we have on exhibition here at the gallery 2 pieces of a 12-piece set that were all shown together. And the birds are framed very, very tightly. What you see here is exactly what you get. And so Helen will talk a little bit about why she chose that method and the message that she wants to get across. And please note when you're looking at, there's 2 of these, I'll show both. Please look carefully at the bird's beak, because you'll see a flower that she'll talk about. So go ahead, Helen.
Yeah. So this piece was created as the Arab Spring is deteriorating. And when I went back to Lebanon for the first time since being there as a young girl, I noticed all these birds in cages, and they were fairly common in Jordan and Syria and in Lebanon. They would be everywhere, in the barber shop and the grocery shop and everywhere, pharmacy and so on. And I started thinking about the symbolism of the bird trapped in a cage. And I went from there thinking about the larger idea of the beauty and the creativeness and the hopefulness and the desire of Arabs and Arab people not to be trapped in their circumstances. And certainly as the protests and the revolutions were continuing to fracture societies and create all kinds of displacement and destruction and hell, I thought of this phoenix bird. And the phoenix is a symbol here again, referring to rising above the ashes. But as Dagmar has noted here, my specific intention with the framing is using these metal frames that symbolize to me the cages that the birds were in and the cages that people are trapped in. And I say cage in a metaphorical way. But also you see here, and they're fighting, they're pushing against all the edges. The flower is retained, yes, as this still hopeful, we're hanging in there kind of message to the outside world, but it's a struggle. And so here, what I hope to show was this idea of beauty and freedom that is being curtailed, and yet with the symbolism of the phoenix, there is hope of rising out of that misery.
We got a note, one of our viewers is interested in knowing about the background colors. There you had red sky on the previous one. This one is blue. Was there, how did you decide how to deal with the background on this very, very colorful bird? Was it to enhance the colors of the bird and make them stand out, or why did you decide what you wanted to do with that?
Well, that's a great question. I love that question. And it's a very aesthetic question. You know, as an artist, yes, I have, as Dagmar said, I'm trying to tell you something that I feel is important to me. But the way I accomplish it, I have to think like an artist. And so I have to think about my training. You know, I got my bachelor's of fine arts. I didn't go on to graduate school. I didn't get my PhD, what have you. But there is this idea of balance, of how you're placing these. This is a large installation, and I work fairly small. So this was always on my floor, and I was trying to balance the reds and the blues and the turquoise to create a whole painting out of 12 individual parts, which is hard. And the palette that I chose is spread out. It's a limited palette, as a lot of colors, but because so much is going on, you kind of have to be consistent with the colors one way or the other to create a cohesiveness and to create something that is, in spite of the fact there's so much detail, so much movement, so much, you look at it and you don't feel yourself going crazy or fractured. I'm moving you around. I'm taking your eye and I'm moving you all around this one big installation of 12 paintings. And I'm trying to have you look at everything that I'm doing there. So the question of the background is very thoughtful and it's very conscious. And it's not easy to do. You have to visualize it all before you even painted it.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't have whatever that great program is so I can see it before I do it. Like some artists I know, darn it, maybe the next year I will, but I don't. So I have to and if I screw up, I screw up. I just don't show anybody.
That
It
has
hides
not
in the
happened very
closet.
often. That does not happen very often.
Yeah, well.
All right, there's another series that is delightful and meaningful at the same time. You did a series called Changing Perceptions. We have 2 of them in this exhibition. You used the style of various modernist painters and then created your own language with them and in a sense translated their style into a message that you wanted to give. And again, with that wry sense of humor on a serious subject. So this one is called Abaya Mondrian. I'll show the other one in a minute. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, here again, this is when we are in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11, and the abaya, which people called the burqa because they learned it from Afghanistan. So the abaya, as this idea of viewed in the media as a negativity, as an oppression, as a symbol of aggression or, even suicide bombers underneath there. And this was very pervasive in the media. And so what I wanted to do here, getting back to the East and West here, and this is a very clear example of it, as is the next example you're going to show. Here you see this incredibly famous, well-known Western artist, Mondrian, who I love, and then the use of the abaya and the juxtaposition of them, as Dagmar said, also with a bit of a humor, but I am making you re-examine the abaya. You cannot look at it again the same way. And you see the use of the blonde hair. I'm taking a lot of different things and flipping it on its head to make you look at something in a different way. Not in a negative way, not as a symbol of oppression, of man's oppression of women and forcing them to wear the abaya. I want you to come away with a different way of looking at this and a discussion. We want a discussion. We want that dialogue to happen. And there were many, many dialogues from men and women who we argued back and forth. On this very series. And so Changing Perceptions, my titles are always very important to me. And so Changing Perceptions was exactly what I hoped to try and do. Mm-hmm.
This is a slightly different take on the use of the veil and the abaya. And with this strong red background that, again, forces you to look, gives you a very straightforward, strong image. I'm intrigued with this one because the message is similar, but also a little bit different. You can talk about the type of veil that she has. And we also talk about this concept of the direct gaze, which we don't get in some of the other work, that is a very negative trope about Arab women, that they never, they have to look down, they can't gaze at you directly. And we'll also address the subject of her beautiful red lips to show who she is.
Right.
And again, breaking down these stereotypes of who we think she is and who she really is. But talk a little bit about the veil first.
Yeah, and also the covering, the idea of covering. So, my grandmother, my teta, wore something. It's a word, mandil is it in Arabic, but it's come from the Spanish, or I don't know who comes first, mantilla, and this idea, of women covering in church. I mean, I think this is how it was very typical in America to cover, to be modest. I'm playing also on that. So here you see her face, you see her beautiful face, and I love that you are looking at it like she is looking directly at you, and she's almost challenging in a way.
Mhm.
And to re-look at her, to look at me again, and don't make those judgments on me. And the red lips and the red background, I think some observations have come that way. Here again, there's an aesthetic choice here as an artist, to either you're looking at the background and going directly to her mouth, or the other way around. But it's very important. There was no other choice for me but to have this red background. And this idea that you're seeing through, you are almost lifting the veil. You are looking through, and she's like saying, come on, go ahead. Don't make, just go ahead and try and judge me, if you will. I should get a thought bubble out of her head too, but
Yeah.
So it's a very
Well,
direct.
we supply our own thought bubbles for sure.
Yeah,
We see
that's
this
right.
piece.
Yeah.
We definitely do. But yeah, she engages with us in such a direct way, and that is a really enormous smashing of a stereotype. In that, for people who haven't had a lot of opportunities to engage, this is something where they're suddenly being placed in a position where they do engage with the person who up until that moment has very much been the other.
Yes.
And now suddenly, especially if you're a woman and you're looking at her,
Right.
and the whole concept of the lipstick. I mean, I've for the last 14 months now, because of our mask wearing, lipstick which is my favorite thing. I've not been able to wear it much because of the masks, and so as a woman, I am directly drawn to a woman who chooses to use that method to express herself, beautify herself, and show herself to the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
The next one is from another exhibition that Helen was in sometime back, called "The Map Is Not the Territory," in which I, with a co-curator, came up with the intersection of the Palestinians, Irish, and Native American, and their histories and their present day issues and conflicts intersected in very many unexpected ways. And we asked artists to work on paper and do some kind of a piece that somehow reflected some or all of those intersections. And Helen's piece is called Woven in Exile. And Helen, you want to talk about what you chose?
Yeah, I do. So here you see in the background these patterns that could be either Native American or Palestinian. There's such an interesting kind of crossing the borders and ideas with color and motifs. And if you do some research, you see some very similar patterning in the Palestinian embroidery and Arab embroidery, which I use quite a bit in my work as for many different reasons. But this, to me, with the Native American symbolism, seemed to me the perfect background. And here I'm using a quote unquote Irish lace with my nod to the Irish problem, Irish issue, and being woven, this domesticity and the female use of the needle and the resilience of the embroidery in itself, the use of embroidery to create, to pass from generation to generation, but as a form of resilience and resistance, I think, too, as far as the embroidery is concerned. So that is some of the ideas of what I was doing back here in this piece. Mm-hmm.
Again, in the title, you mentioning how important your titles are.
Yeah.
The woven in exile element of it, the exile element, is this this universal idea that women of various cultures have ways of having some agency if they're able to make these productions of blankets or weaving on dresses, or the lace that grounds them and centers them in the place from which they come, and the stories that they want to pass on to their children, especially when their communities are disturbed and destroyed through war or persecution, or in the case of the Palestinians, occupation.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Okay, so now we're going to look at two pieces done in two different times that have some similarities and some differences, very interesting. This first one is Helen's title, Women Against the Night. And she'll talk about it a little bit, but as you look at it, there's the classic patterning of great variations, beautiful colors, and look at the way the women are supporting each other. They're very close to each other. They create a wall with their bodies that is not only supporting each other, but also creating a wall against the conflict, against the oppression and the chaos that is out there in the night. And they're protecting themselves and their families. I know Helen will talk to the fact that, over time, almost all her work has devolved into the concept of women and children taking the brunt of whatever chaos and conflict and oppression there is in the world. It's always the women and children who seem to be the ones unprotected and most affected by this. So I love this piece. I think it's incredibly powerful because it's the artistic choices that were made in this composition, and the setup of the composition is really, really important to the message. You can talk about a little bit, Helen, and then I'll move to the other one and we'll do a little compare and contrast.
Well, this piece was created. I was invited by the State Department as a cultural envoy to go to Palestine in the West Bank, and I had never been there. And I was doing a workshop in Ramallah, and but at the time there was a buildup to ultimately like the siege in Gaza, and many things were happening, little things here and there, and there was a lot of protesting. And one day I was coming back, and women alone were protesting, and men were protesting, but they were separated at this time. And when I came back to America, things were getting increasingly more dicey there. And I was thinking about the strength of women. And here you see the use of my inspiration from Palestinian embroidery, from the beautiful embroidery that I had seen and was researched and loved. And as Dagmar said, it's very purposeful what I'm doing here, the shoulder to shoulder, the idea of beauty, the idea also, again, of resilience, of strength, of standing together, of we are in this ourselves, we are in this alone. And as Dagmar mentioned, the women and children that become so important to me are, in general, the ones left to pick up the pieces. I mean, the men are dead or fighting or gone or disappeared. So the women are the ones responsible for shelter, for food, for school, for taking care of their children. And so this is very much a piece of that the women are supporting one another, and but in this beautiful, strong, resilient, and you see that the figures are elongated here. It was very purposeful. They're almost to the top of that painting, but you see the night, and they are facing it together. And as you said, this wall of strength and beauty.
And note, now that I'm going to slide to the other one, these women are also carrying their individuality with them, as most people already know about embroidery, especially Palestinian embroidery, it denotes where you come from, down to the granular level. I mean, it's not only just a general area or a country, but I mean, it can go down to the specific village, and also the specific time frame. And so it is a major marker of nationality and belonging, down to a very, very granular level. So here you've got women who are standing together, but are also differentiated in their own embroideries and patterning that goes on. Now, the next one, which is painted later, is also women. But notice the differences. In this case, the small embroidery patterning, that kind of thing, is no longer in this image. There's again, and Helen will talk to you a lot about her choices in making this painting. And you notice this sense of motion in the curves, in the very elongated arms that are holding the pots, and all of these women are moving. They're and you can almost feel the rush in the, if you follow the motion of the curves of the design. The women are all different, but not in the way that the previous piece was. They're more of a group working together, going together. We don't know, and maybe Helen has an idea of what she wanted. Are they running away from some chaos? Are they trying to save their families? Are they going towards something? Are they going towards some exile? Are they trying to leave a conflict? Whatever it is, they're doing it together, and they're reinforcing each other. But they're actually, you can just feel them sort of pushing forward and moving it in a direction.
I it's interesting because I'm looking at this piece now again, and certainly compared, you hung them together specifically to look at the different sort of periods that I painted in. And this one is after that one. And you talked about a little bit of an abstraction of my spring landscape painting, which, as you say, not many people think of my work as abstract, per se. But if you were just to sort of close your eyes and squint and look at this, you see lines, you see a lot of movement. And here too, and my title, Sisters Too, this is once again this unity and this community of women taking care of one another. And I don't know if you want to think about Hillary Clinton's village, but they certainly, I'm just that's just coming to mind right now. But it is taking care of one another and working towards the goal of either safety or shelter or protection or what have you, but it is women relying on one another. And it is a great deal of movement, and using the stripes as a common, excuse my wording here, thread throughout the painting also keeps you moving aesthetically. And as Dagmar was feeling, like she feels like this movement, and you can feel the sort of heat and the movement and the swishing of their abayas that I have artistically chosen to create stripe. So these are choices that artists get to make.
Yeah, that's why we love art, is to learn these things.
Right.
I just have a quick question before we go on. Someone saw our image of the Woven in Exile piece, and they feel that it's almost three-dimensional, and wanted to know if this was intentional. I do want to note that piece, unlike many of your other pieces, which are gouache on board, was actually on paper, because this particular piece was from a show where everything needed to be on. We asked all the artists to create works on paper. Mm-hmm. But I think perhaps the choice of material helped, it gave it a dimension because it absorbed some of the paint, perhaps, in a way that board does not.
Well, there's a texture.
There's definitely a texture. And that may have been the reason that it felt, at least to our viewer, three-dimensional.
Yeah, that piece is on canson paper, which is a very interesting. It's a bit rougher than what I work on, which is this cold press illustration board, which is actually a board. And Dagmar, one of the parameters of that exhibition was the ability to pack it up quickly in case we had some negativity from the outside, on the exhibition because of the delicate sort of subject matter. But it was very interesting to use that paper because it did create a different kind of base for the gouache that I use. And so it's an interesting observation that they could see that there's sort of a more textured feeling to that painting. And the use of color there too, from behind as the black comes out and the lace on top. It is a very texturally feeling painting.
Definitely. Yeah, and we're hoping that those of you who are in the Washington area would be able to come into the gallery. We are open by appointment, and it's even more wonderful to see them all in person and see the nuances. This piece, Moonlight Fishing, is also one of the greatest hits because again, it's universality of meaning. And its delightfulness, it's a dream, a fairy tale in so many ways. And when I show it here, I always like to point out to people what a good fisher person this is, because look at all those fish in the boat.
Well, and also, yeah, the peacock is a symbol of hope and protection. And so you have him there. Yeah, it's a dream. It's a dream. And, people even change the title when they look at it. They call it, they forget, but they remember the essence of the painting. But a lot of times they'll refer to this painting as Moonlight Dreaming. Mm-hmm. And I have to figure out what they're talking about. But it's like a dream. It's sort of ethereal. There's references here. I lived in Kuwait for several years. And at the time, they were known for their pearl diving. And the sailors would go out for a long time at sea and dive for pearls. And I don't think they have it very much anymore, but it's in the Gulf region, and certainly was very common on these beautiful trunks that they would hold their equipments in on the ship for long periods of time. And they use brass tacks to decorate, to pass the time on the ships, on these Kuwaiti dhows is what they were. So I was thinking of those pearl divers here as well when I was doing this piece called Moonlight Fishing.
So now we're going to talk a little bit more about your art background and how you like to reference it. And obviously your sense of humor and the ability to make us smile. This is Look Who's Coming to Dinner. And if you would, Helen, point out the references.
Okay. So
we have.
Yes, so we have, with your pointer, we have Klimt. We have Gustav Klimt. We have a small reference via the kitty cat to Leger. We have Howard Johnson, great African-American painter, H.F. Johnson, who I learned when I came to America. I didn't study very many African-American artists. I didn't study any Arab artists. I studied them on the walls of the collections that my parents had of Iraqi and Lebanese art that I grew up with. You see there to the left is Picasso, and above her is Lichtenstein there. Okay, Lichtenstein, and then Frida Kahlo. Right above Frida is Leger, who no one ever gets. To the left there again is Rousseau. And then on the right in the corner is a reference to Matisse. And Dagmar and I were talking about this and how it came about. And this is actually another series. I do a lot of times work in series called All the Good Ones Are Dead. And it happened after one of my trips on a Sunday afternoon to the Hirshhorn Museum here in DC. And I was looking at a Picasso, and in front of me were a man and a woman. And I heard the man say to his partner, see, I told you all the good ones are dead. And of course, as a artist who's alive, who's standing there, you know, I was very, very offended and irritated. You know, I wanted to like say, wait a minute, you know. So I always keep a notebook with me. And I went out and I sat on that low wall around the Hirshhorn and I wrote what he said. And ultimately, it turned into a show I did in New York called All the Good Ones Aren't Dead. I called it All the Good. And then in that show, what I did was I took out all the artists that I love, you know, and I did a sort of collage of them. Oh, I did Rousseau, I did Matisse, I got all these artists that I really loved, and I made this collage out of pieces of their work and everything. And then as the series progressed, they became more like these vignettes. And this is an example. Look who's coming to dinner. Oh, I just imagine this conversation that we could all have if we were sitting at that table with these artists. So I did a little bit of changing. I had an epiphany one day at my drawing board when I wanted to change one of Picasso's colors to fit in with what I wanted. And I sort of looked up and I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm just Helen Zughaib here, but please don't get mad at me and strike me dead. I'm going to change this blue to orange or something like that. I was having a conversation with him up in heaven, you know, like, but he's probably in hell because he wasn't very nice. So
in the middle.
yeah, but it became a loosening of my obsessiveness with to be, you know, take them so seriously. So I began, you know, manipulating them more and in this whimsical way. Yes. So it's an ongoing series.
That's great. We love it.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. Woven in Exile is getting people obsessed with questions here. And there's two really interesting ones. One is about moonlight fishing. And the person wants to know, is it part of the stories, your father's stories, or is it just a folk tale or just a dream?
Yes, no, it's not part of my father's stories, but I can see why the person thought that. It is not. It really is a sort of like a dream in my own mind. That you know, it's something that I just visualized, and this sense of tranquility and peacefulness and just quiet, you know, just quiet in that piece.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to include it in the show, because as I said, we're doing it's a bit of a retrospective, but I really wanted to show so many different facets of the work that you produce, because as I said, so much of it is tied to very, very serious subjects and things that happen. The other question is absolutely intriguing. I love this question. Someone asked, and I'll read it because it's perfect. Did you, if we're talking about Woven in Exile, did you choose the word woven because if you change the middle letter, it becomes women?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I love that too. And what I find when I hear questions and other people looking at my work, looking at my title, I'm so glad you're paying attention to my titles because I think hard about them. I want them to be part of the painting. I want to help you into my painting. I don't want to push you away, like I said. But I love that. And I definitely didn't do that on purpose. I wish I could take credit for that, but I love that. And it's something that I'm going to think about from now on, re-examining some of these things that are very purposeful, but maybe there is another level that you don't think about, and it takes someone else's powers of observation to examine again and tell me a new way of looking at my own work. I love that, and these discussions really excite me because I learned so much from you out there who are looking and your references and your comments, Dagmar, and woven in exile. Wow, it was, I love that. It was not, I wish I could claim that, but no.
Well, that's interesting. Just to digress for a moment, this has happened many times when we've had your exhibitions. We had one, I think it was one of the Arab Spring pieces, and the triptych, and the way that these people were. They were coming, it looked like they were coming or perhaps going, but it depended on which direction you read their movement. And of course, our Arab viewers, a lot of them were reading it, reading the painting is what I really mean. I mean, they're looking at the painting as if they're reading a book. And of course, they're reading it from right to left. And
as
then,
you read Arabic.
Yes. And other people read it from left to right. And so they were saying, oh, yes, well, it's very obvious in this painting that they're going in that direction. And other people were saying, no, they're coming from that direction. And it's equally valid for the painting. It could have been both interpretations. We've had quite a lot of that. There was another painting that you did called Peace Puzzle, in which you wrote the word salam on blocks that were Velcroed, and they were all upside down and cattywampus. And the idea was if peace were ever solved, the puzzle of peace were ever solved, all of these would be put right side up and you would read peace across the piece. But people were looking at this and seeing the word peace in English, even though that was not the intention at all, but they could find it within your version of the Kufic writing that you used. So that's one of the joys of having exhibitions, or virtual exhibitions, as we're trying to do here, is that the engagement of the audience is so enriching, and the success of the artist is such that the audience can find more things in the painting than certainly in the conscious design of the artist. Getting personal, you have some self-portraits, and I'll show you in a minute the little miniatures that evolved a little bit later. But as I said at the beginning, you don't do a lot of self-portraits. But there's definitely always certain elements that are in it. And I'm going to talk about two and you talk about the others, but there's always a paintbrush involved. You're either holding it or you are it in this case. And there's always the ubiquitous cat. But there are other elements too that you bring out when you decide to do a self-portrait.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting when you wanted some of my self-portraits here for this exhibition, this sort of quote unquote retrospective, and looking back at work that I've done and so on, the self-portraits seem to come for me, even including Map of Home, which is a much more recent one. Recent, I say like 2010. Right. For me, recent, because I'm not doing them much anymore. At the Watergate, there are a couple of two new ones actually, but in talking to you earlier today, Dagmar, I was thinking about it, and usually they're coming out of some sort of a bit of strife, a bit of pain, a bit of some change that's happening inside of me. So here I am, Map of Home. I am going back to Lebanon for the first time in 35 years. And we were evacuated from the Civil War. We left my father there. It was a very painful time. And then those years later, when I'm going back for an exhibition, I'm rethinking about all those painful memories that have been pushed down. And that portrait came out. And here too, moving away from situations, it's a time where there's some change or something that I want to re-examine myself. And in the show across the street that you mentioned,
we're going to mention it at the end. Yeah.
Yes, there's a couple new portraits there. So portraits reflecting on the past year that we've all gone through. And in that case, we've shared a lot of similar situations vis-a-vis the COVID and pandemic and so on. So they usually come at a time, it's very unconscious. I just can't sit and, they're very purposeful. And I look at it afterwards and say, oh, okay, now I'm getting it. I'm not always knowing why I'm doing it. But in looking at this show, you know, it's so interesting that you're allowing me to look at my work back too. So thank you for that little bit of something I didn't expect.
For
Talking
fun,
about little,
we're talking really little.
really little.
For fun, we decided that it would be fun to have a little bit of new work, even though this is a retrospective show. And so, in the spirit of the self-portraits and those beautiful frames that could be hanging in you know, some years ago in a beautiful Syrian drawing room or somewhere, Helen has gifted us with 4 tiny miniatures in her signature style. These are all hand painted with tropes from various paintings. Obviously, the cat's coffee pot and a beautiful little garden. And if you are able to come to the gallery, it'll be really fun for you to see these because they're really tiny. A question: what is the name of your cat?
Well, okay, are you ready, viewers? Are you ready?
There are many names, many cats.
Okay, yes. So that black and white one is Poo Poo Head.
Okay.
Poo Poo Head and Chunky Beefy.
Okay.
And the other 2 are Stumpy and Clumpy.
All right then.
Thank you. Are you sorry you asked that question?
No. I already knew the answer, you know. Anyway, please note there's a special element of this particular small cat, if you can see, and you'll see it even better if you come to the gallery. But there is a little bit of a 3-dimensional quality to this small cat.
Yeah, that's Poo Poo Head.
I just want to briefly mention the other things that are in the gallery. Helen did a video with photographer Amy Joseph for an exhibition that we did. It was all video show called Virtual Palestine. And her piece was Wish. And it was very short, just about less than a minute. But it embodied the idea of a little boy wearing a Palestinian keffiyeh, tossing that coin into the fountain, the universalist idea of making a wish and having wishes from all over the world. And the word wish is then spelled in multiple languages. It's a lovely video. The other thing we have to show you, if you're able to come in, is a screen that shows the entire, to the moment, oeuvre of the Syrian migration series. Some of you have been able to see that exhibition, but there's a lot more to it at the moment. It's a series inspired by Jacob Lawrence. I'm going to let Helen speak to it for the moment. And what we're looking at here is the first piece of the series, which is a series of that can be viewed in order. In terms of the beginning of the Syrian conflict, and this is the last piece in the exhibition itself. This is an image from the screen of how they show on the screen, and this is a sliding screen that contrasts the inspiration pieces from Jacob Lawrence to Helen's work with the Syrian migration. But just give a really quick little summary of what you were doing. And I even have not seen many of these because you continuously add to the numbers that you're producing on the series.
Right. Yeah, I see we've gone over time. Oh, sorry. Wait, it's okay. Okay. Well, thank you for staying with us, whoever is still with us. But yes, this is a series that I did. It's ongoing. If you do come to the gallery, please take a look at that slide projection that Dagmar has going, because it includes a lot of my new work on this series. So there is new work in the show, and it is ongoing until I feel that particular story has been told as best as I can do it visually. So this is a series of now over 44, I think, paintings inspired by Jacob Lawrence's great 60 panel series, 60 panels and narratives depicting the movement of African Americans from the rural South to the urban north, escaping Jim Crow laws and lynching and segregation, in hope, escaping drought, escaping for a better life in the north, or so they thought. And so in researching that incredible series and witnessing the ongoing of the Syrian war as a result of the quote unquote Arab Spring and the revolutions that began there in 2011, that this painting here on the left depicts the early days of the protests and in Dara in Syria that then spin out of control. And here we are 10 and more years later with the war ongoing. The war is still going on. And so I am continuing to work and put my heart and soul in this exhibition and continue, as Dagmar referred to earlier, focus on the women and children that are really left fighting, you know, for themselves and their families, and some sort of a peace and shelter, and so on and so forth. So I really am trying to keep this series alive and keep their voices out, because they're voiceless at this time. And I really think that's very important, that we don't forget. I don't want people to forget. So I'm continuing to work on. So thank you for showing these pieces. Very important to me.
I want to conclude with just letting you know that if you're anywhere in the area, you will have the ability to see new work from Helen starting tomorrow. The Watergate Gallery, which is directly across the street from our space, is opening a two-person show that features Helen's work, new work that has to do with her, with artists in general and how they've been dealing with the issues of the pandemic. So it's very exciting for us. I'm looking forward to going myself and seeing this new work. And I think it's a really wonderful thing that many artists have been able to continue to work during what was such a difficult time, and a time of exhaustion and fear, and the inability to have the kind of dialogue we're having today, where they weren't able to show their work, they weren't able to connect with audiences, and nobody wants to work in a vacuum. They need that back and forth to sort of feed the creative spirit. And so we're very delighted that a lot of artists are now slowly getting the opportunity to show their work. And certainly we're happy that Helen is going to be able to show her new work as well. So that's it for today. I want to thank you again, Helen, for participating in this dialogue, and thank all of you who had a chance to watch it. It is being recorded, and it will be available on the Jerusalem Fund website in a couple of days. It will be as a YouTube video. And so those of you who love reruns, you'll be able to see it then. Thank you so much. And
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dagmar. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.